There's always suspicion of large organizations in immense amounts of power, whether it's a corporation or government, or an evil society.
When they're working together.
Mutants, yeah, especially when they're all working together.
Hi, I'm Tracy Oppenheimer for Reason TV, and today we're here at Comic-Con with Simon Kinberg. He is a screenwriter and producer on the latest X-Men movie, Days of Future Past, also the upcoming X-Men Apocolypse, Fantastic Four, and Star Wars Rebels.
I've come a long way to guide us, to bring us together. The X-Men. We need your help.
Tell whoever it was that sent you that I'm busy.
Simon, thanks for taking the time to talk to us
Sure,
today.
thank you.
X-Men, it's part of why it's so successful, I would think, is how relatable it is to a wide audience. Can you just talk about some of the relatability that's part of your creative process?
Yeah, well, I think with the X-Men there's something inherently relatable to the idea, which is that everybody, especially when they were, I think, a teenager, but in any sort of stage of life, feels a bit of an outsider, feels a little different, feels like they have something that makes them, embarrassed or shamed, lesser than. And so for everybody, there's something about sort of mutancy that we can connect to, relate to. So I think there is something inherently relatable about the idea of being a mutant. And then I think one of the things they did so well in the comic, and we try to do in the movies, is there's different sort of each stage of life is represented. So you have like the younger kids who are more the students at Xavier's school. You have obviously Xavier, who's a more grown up and paternal character. You have Eric, Magneto, who's also a slightly more grown up paternal character, but also messed up and sort of trying to find his place in the world. So you have sort of the whole pantheon of almost like human experience.
Can you talk about how, from a societal perspective, they do start out, as outcasts, but society grows to accept them more or less, and we see that because of the time travel. Can you talk about how that might parallel our society a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think obviously being different and outsider and the sort of majority world being kind of xenophobic and prejudiced against those people is something that can stand as a metaphor for racism, for sexism, for anti-Semitism, for homophobia. As I know specifically for Bryan Singer, he's big gay rights sort of activist, and the homophobia angle of it was interesting to him, but he's also Jewish, and I think the anti-Semitism was interesting, and Magneto is a Jewish character who lost his parents in the Holocaust. So I think there is a sort of, again, inherently political aspect to it, and what we tried to create by the end of Days of Future Past was some sense that the world, A, acknowledges that mutants exist, because that really wasn't the case in the 1973 of the former timeline, and B, that while there are mutants out there, just as there are humans out there who are dangerous, there are also mutants out there, just as there are humans, who can help us, protect us, and are just like us.
Yeah, can you talk about how it really comes down to individualism, and there's good and bad on both sides, on the government, mutants, every walk of life, and it really boils down to the person and their choices.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about setting the movie in the 1970s, which was a decision that was an arbitrary decision we made, because we could have set it, in the 60s when First Class took place, we could have set it in the 80s, and we chose the 70s because it was a particularly sort of dark period in American history because of what happened with Nixon, because of Vietnam, and so, the movie shows that there are the possibility for evil or nefarious activity on human side, on the mutant side, and that ultimately people can change, and meaning you're not just born good, and you're not just born and destined to be bad.
Professor? You're gonna find this hard to believe.
I was sent here for you.
From the future?
50 years from now.
Could you give me that one more time, please?
Stay with me.
In the beginning, the Sentinels were just targeting mutants. Then they began targeting everyone.
On that note, with Nixon and the Sentinels, a government program run amok, that storyline is somewhat popular in these kind of movies. What makes that such a usable plot line?
Well, I think there's always suspicion of large organizations in immense amounts of power, whether it's a corporation or government, or an evil society
working together.
Mutants. Yeah, especially when they're all working together. So, and the 70s is a rich time for that because there was corruption in the government, and there was maybe more pernicious things happening than even in the 80s and the 90s and this last decade.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for taking the time.
Sure, of course. Thank you.
For Reason TV, I'm Tracy Oppenheimer.